In lecture 2, we're going to discuss transportation security before September 11. Okay, like I mentioned in the last lecture, September 11 or 9/11 is a watershed for transportation security systems. So let's just use it as a checkpoint. Okay, and we're going to discuss transportation security in terms of maritime, land, and aviation, respectively, in this lecture. Okay, so let's get started. So firstly, I want to revisit some basic definitions and concepts introduced the last lecture. The first one, of course, transportation. So it's the movement of goods and persons from place to place and various means by which such movement is accomplished. Okay, that's the definition of transportation. And then our transportation network, like I mentioned before, um, transportation methods themselves, they are not that powerful. But if you just connect transportation channels and corridors and form a network, then transportation network is powerful enough um, for us. Okay, so transportation network is a realization of a spatial network describing a structure which permits either vehicular movement or flow of some commodity. Okay, so here is an example of transportation network. I believe some of you know what I'm trying to show here. So it's an Asian transportation network called Silk Road. It's a network of trade routes and transportation connecting West and East from 2nd century BCE to 18th century. So here, this transportation network has two sub-networks. One is addressed by red linear features, which is the Land Silk Road. Another part is addressed by blue linear features. They are maritime um, corridors of Ocean Silk Road. You can see that this system was distributed from China to Europe in ancient to connect the whole continent of Euro-Asian continent, right? So what's the mode or what are those modes, transportation modes used here? Two modes, right? Land and maritime modes, land and maritime. What are those specific means or methods used here? For maritime, of course, ships, right? For land, there could be horses, could be camels, or could be a wagon, right? Wagons, but wagons, they are driven, they're pulled by horses or camels, right? So back then, we did not have automobiles or airplanes, right? So how about nodes? What are nodes? Nodes are those locations existing in transportation networks, um, um, serving as hubs or um, important um, junctions, right? So nodes, big cities in ancient times, right? For example, in China, Xi'an and Nanjing, they used to be big cities on Asian Silk Road, and still they're very big cities now in China. And Turkey, that very famous city, Constantinople, right? It's religious and it was conquered by multiple religions in ancient time. It was also an important hub connecting Europe and Asia in ancient time with with unique exotic culture, right? And some other big cities existed and existing maybe today in ancient Silk Road, including Balkhash in Afghanistan, Merv in Turkmenistan. Okay, so I just want to use this very famous and well-known ancient transportation network. To remind you the concept, to give you a review of concept of transportation network. And it was a big one. And you would ask, how was the security system of this ancient, powerful, huge transportation network? I would say, I'm not sure. I'm not a historian, but I would say that different countries, they were responsible for their own regions in this transportation system. So I suppose there was international cooperation on transportation security back several thousand years ago, right? Right? Because if you want to do business, you want to prevent piracy, you want to prevent robberies in this huge system, you have to send people to patrol to make sure the safety of those businessmen, right? Okay, now let's talk about maritime security and then land transportation security and aviation security. Okay, firstly, maritime. Why maritime? Because early civilizations and trading systems, they're usually found near waterways, Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Ganges, Huanghe River in China. So these huge rivers, all those ancient civilizations, they are found nearby these huge rivers. Why? Because water is something you need to live for human beings and all types of lives on this planet, right? And rivers, especially big rivers, they are convenient for transportation. That's another reason. Before the Industrial Revolution, land transportation was limited in speed, efficiency, and extent. And the river itself can provide the power to move goods and people as long as you can build shapes. What's that power? It's gravity, right? Water is always running from high places to low places and eventually to the ocean, And the humans know how to use this power to make movement. Okay, and since we're talking about maritime security, right, piracy is the main threat to maritime transportation systems. And what's the definition of piracy? So it's an act of boarding or attempting to board any ship with apparent intent. Okay, so the apparent intent here equals purposeful acts, okay, to commit theft or any other crime. So piracy is a threat to transportation security. It's not like an accident, right? Because piracy is something with apparent intent. And with apparent intent or capability to use force in furtherance of that act. So that's piracy. And piracy is mostly used for maritime security, right? If somebody is trying to hijack a plane, we say hijacking instead of piracy, right? So this definition is given by an international organization called IMB, which refers to International Maritime Bureau. And it is a division of another organization called International Chamber of Commerce, the largest, most representative business organization in the world. So you can say that in business world, those businessmen, companies, they care about uh, not only maritime security, but in general transportation security, because if they want to do business and earn money safely, they need to care about the security of transportation systems, right? That's very natural. And the headquarters of ICC is in, I think, France, and Paris. Okay, so piracy can be dated back to the first millennium BCE, and the development of transoceanic trade routes since the 15th century led to a golden age of piracy. Back then in 15th century, it was during the age of discovery. Is it called age of discovery? Because that was when the development of capitalism achieved its best, okay, especially in Europe. European kingdoms stimulated the finding of new colonies, trade partners, and the trading routes. And during that time, everybody was trying to find new places to colonize. And the geopolitics were not stable at all, which means that everybody cared about themselves back then, and they did not have time and they didn't bother to patrol their maritime corridors or to implement law enforcements. And in the mid 19th century, there was a sharp decline of piracy because geopolitics back in mid 19th century were more stable than the golden age of discovery, right? Due to several reasons. Firstly, recognition of distinct colonial boundaries, which means that this is my area, that's your area, right? We have very clear boundaries, and we should be aware of piracies happening in our own regions, right? So now everything is stable. We should enforce. We should carry out law enforcement. Okay, and the second reason, development of aggressive and effective anti-piracy patrol. And the third reason, establishment of national and international sanctions. Like I said, when everybody was grabbing gold and the colonists, they did not even care about piracy. That's when piracy was was happy, okay, because no one was there to arrest me, okay. So strangely, there was a resurgence of piracy since 1970. Okay, here is a graph showing you the frequency of maritime incidents, or you can consider them in general as piracy, since 1970 to 2000. Okay, so maritime terrorism incidents from 1970 to 2000. You can see that from 1970 to 1984, the frequency of maritime terrorism attack increased dramatically year by year. There was a drop in 1976 and 1980, but in general, the trend is clear here, right? And for 1992, there is a gap. I think that's because there was no data to summarize here. So you can clearly say this resurgence, especially the peak here in 1984. After that, I mean, the frequency decreases gradually, but still, right? You can say there are a lot of them every year. So why the resurgence of piracy since 1970? There are a lot of reasons. Firstly, more potential targets, which means that maritime corridors were very busy since 1970. And there was reduced governmental navy deployment. The business increased, but there was no more patrol from different governments. So more targets, less patrol, less naval deployment, so more piracy. Okay, and lack of effective anti-piracy laws within those countries, and also at international scale. Okay, and more advanced ships with less crew members. Technology is in general is a good thing, right? We can use GPS today. We can use telecommunication systems. We have advanced weapons to defend ourselves. So for all those ships sailing from one country to another across oceans, they do not need so many sailors anymore, which means that in general, they become easier and easier to board because less people are on the on ships, and pirates know that. So it's easier to I should not say hijack, but it's just similar. It's easier to board a ship. It's easier to carry out piracy. Okay, and more ships with lower speed and cheaper technology and arms. Technology can also be used by criminals, right? Naval GP, I mean not naval, civil GPS signals today are already very accurate. At least I think accurate enough for all those criminals to find a ship and board, right? And especially in developing countries, poor countries, weapons are relatively easier to access. So especially in East Africa, which is very famous, Somalia, which is very famous for piracy. Okay, so here are some reasons why there was this resurgence of piracy since 1970. And despite the resurgence of the piracy, maritime terrorism has been less frequent than terrorist acts against the land and air transportation. You should know that, okay? So here is a terrorist incidents map from 2000 to 2013. So we have red circles and say blue circles, right? Red circles, all attacks since 2000 scaled by number of fatalities, so, which means the larger the size of a red circle, the larger the number of fatalities. We have a big circle on the east coast of United States. That's 9/11, right? And worst attacks in 2013, they are addressed by blue circles. So if you observe the locations of these circles, you'll find that most of them, they are happening inland. I mean, a lot of them, they are happening along the coastline, along coastlines, but I would say most of them, they are inland. They're inland. And why? Because many terrorist organizations are not located within coastal regions. Okay, they are usually located inland. And secondly, operating at sea is more difficult. You have to train your members to have skills and for example, how to use a ship, how to swim, how to board a ship. Okay, you need skills, you need vehicles, you need non-land-based environment to carry out maritime terrorist attacks. So it's more difficult than than terrorist attacks on land. So why? Because you believe it or not, I mean, running a terrorist or terrorism organization is not an easy thing. Just think about it. Okay, so why not maritime attacks? So mainly land attacks. And here I just want to review this very famous hijacking of Achille Lauro. It's an Italian cruise. Okay, of course, it's about maritime security. It was an act of. It's not piracy. It's terrorist attack. So on October 7, 1985, Italian cruise ship was hijacked off the coast of Egypt as weapons were brought aboard while in port in Cairo. So this ship belongs to Italy, was hijacked off coast of Egypt, and it was actually sailing from Alexandria to Ashdod, which is an Israel city. So you can see the complexity here. And it was hijacked by 4 PLO members, Palestine Liberation Organization, which is considered as a terrorist organization by most countries around the world. And what makes this terrorist attack even more complex is that the only casualty was a disabled male passenger from US. He was a US citizen. He was killed and thrown off the ship. Okay, so what's the demand? What's the purpose of this attack? So PLO, this 4 PLO terrorists hijacked this ship. I should not say boat. It was a ship, right? Demanded the release of 50 Palestinians held in Israeli jails. Okay, so this ship actually stopped in port in Cairo, I think, to pick up more people because it was a cruise ship, right? Tourists, and weapons were carried on board in Cairo. So what's the impact here? Firstly, raise the publicity of Palestinian issue. It drew so much attention from international society and media. Potential of terrorism to yield substantial media attention and economic damage. So for most terrorist attacks, their purpose is political. They always demand something. It's not like piracy. Piracy is relatively straightforward compared to terrorist attacks. What's piracy? Usually, if you are a pirate, you board a ship, you want to claim properties on this ship, or you keep hostages and demand ransom, which means that they do not want to kill people. Killing people is not the purpose here. But for terrorist attacks, they do not even want your properties or money. They want political benefits, right? They want attention, and sometimes they simply want characters. So it's more complex, it's more difficult to deal with, right? Because there is no room or barely room to negotiate with criminals. And what the second impact here is is that the international society realized that there is this inadequacy of security measures undertaken by the maritime industry, right? 2 packages with firearms and hand grenades were easily carried on board this ship, with maybe thousands of tourists. Okay? And also the need for timely and accurate intelligence gathering and international cooperation on counterterrorism. So how many countries were involved? United States, Israel, Egypt, and the ship belongs to Italy. That's 4 countries. And this incident happened off the coast of Egypt. So who should be responsible? Who should be dealing with this terrorist attack? There are 4 countries involved. Palestine, yes, it is considered as a country nowadays by some countries, but not by others. Let's just say Palestine is another region around the world involved. So 5 countries and regions. So you need international cooperation on intelligence gathering, in the response to this type of acts. But there was no international laws or international cooperation, or barely cooperation, on this type of piracy and terrorist attacks back then, okay, in 1980s. Okay, so that means that before 9/11, before that huge tragedy happened, the international society did not care much about transportation security systems, especially maritime transportation security. So some summaries for pre-9/11 maritime security systems. So at global scale, international laws mainly focused on piracy, on the high seas. High seas means that these areas, they do not belong to any country. So no country has um, jurisdiction on high seas. That's the reason why pirates like high seas, because nobody will actually have the right to arrest you on the high seas, right? And did not encompass attacks in national waters or terrorist actions or terrorist acts. At national scale, maritime security systems varied from one country to another and were generally limited in resources because like the figure I showed you before, most terrorist attacks, they happen inland instead of um, on uh, on seas or happen in maritime transportation systems. So not a lot of resources are invested were invested in maritime security. And there are also poor countries and rich countries. And there are countries care more about maritime security, and some others may not care that much. So the maritime security systems, the quality of them varied from one to another. Okay. And specifically in the United States, the Coast Guard was given responsibility for the security of US ports, waterways, vessels, and waterfront facilities. And for this class, we will mainly focus on transportation security policies and systems in the United States. A little bit about Europe, some examples from Europe or from other countries, but for this class, US is still the main role here, okay? And here is a report. I want to just use some information from this report. Security issues reflected by the report of Interagency Commission on Crime and Security in US Seaports. Of course, this report is from a governmental commission, okay, of United States. Problems of maritime security in US. Firstly, lack control of access to sensitive areas within seaports. Mechanical room or power room or other areas can contain or can store cargoes. Those areas should be seriously and I mean, should be protected, right? Should be seriously treated. And only some people with a specific clearance should be allowed to access these areas, but there was less control of access. And rely too much on private security personnel who lack crime prevention and law enforcement training and the capability of regular police officers, right? Especially here in US, we believe the power of market. We do not believe so much, we do not put so much trust in the government. So usually we prefer to use private companies, private security personnel. But sometimes you should know that the government should be a part of this, especially when we're talking about security. Okay, so the combination of private companies and public sector, in other words, government is important. Okay, for transportation security. We'll see a lot of examples in this class, in this semester, that unified policies from the government is crucial to transportation security. And now we're in this huge pandemic. We should also realize that unified policies from the government is not only important to transportation security, is also crucial to different types of emergency. Okay, okay. So maritime security was not given a high priority by US and other governments before 9/11. That's the one sentence summary of pre 9/11 maritime security. Okay, okay. I will stop here and I will use, I suppose, one or two videos to finish this lecture. And I'm going to introduce pre 9/11 land transportation security and aviation security. Okay, thank you.